My mother and I had a code. 3 words, that's it. No explanation needed, no follow-up required. We created it when I was 13 years old, sitting at the kitchen table after my father's funeral while she pressed her palms flat against the wood grain like she was trying to hold the floor down. She looked at me very seriously, the way she only did when she needed me to actually listen, and she said, "If you ever get that message from me, you come. You don't ask why. You don't call first. You just come." 26 years passed without me ever receiving it. Then at 11:42 on a Tuesday night, it appeared on my phone screen. 3 words, and then, 10 seconds later, a location pin, her kitchen in Raleigh. I was already in my truck before I'd finished reading it twice. I drove through steady rain with my headlights cutting pale tunnels in the dark. I wasn't panicking, not exactly. Panic is loud and messy, and I had been trained out of loud and messy a long time ago. What I felt was something colder and more focused, the specific kind of alertness that switches on when your brain understands that something is genuinely wrong and that it needs to be right the first time. My mother, Elaine, was not a dramatic woman. She did not send emergency signals about minor inconveniences. She did not exaggerate, did not catastrophize, did not ask for help casually. This was a woman who once drove herself to urgent care with a fractured wrist because she didn't want to bother anybody on a Saturday. If she had used our code after 26 years of silence, the situation on the other end of that location pin was real. I pulled off 2 streets away from her house and sat in the dark for 30 seconds, just listening to the rain on the roof of the cab, slowing my breathing down deliberately. Then I drove to the back of the property, parked, and approached on foot through the yard with the spare key pressed hard into my palm. I noticed the porch light first. That was wrong. My mother, Elaine Mercer, who believed in turning off every lamp before bed, who washed and reused butter tubs, who kept the thermostat cold enough to build what she called character. My mother never left the porch light burning late at night. The fact that it was on, glowing warmly through the rain like nothing was wrong, told me something was very wrong. I stood at the back of the property for a moment and just listened. Thunder, distant, rolling toward the highway, water cascading from clogged gutters, a television playing inside, voices too muffled to identify. No yelling, no sound of anything breaking. Somehow the quiet scared me more than noise would have. I unlocked the back door slowly and stepped inside. The smell reached me first, burnt coffee and whiskey, the combination of a bad evening that had stretched too long. Then I saw the broken mug near the sink, just the pieces of it, scattered, ceramic edges catching the light. I didn't call out. Old instincts. 26 years in Army intelligence teaches you to enter a room quietly, to read the details before the emotions get involved. I cataloged everything without touching it. One chair pushed back too far from the table, like somebody had stood up fast. A cabinet hanging open that should have been closed. My mother's purse on the floor. And near the sink, a paper towel folded with a smear of lipstick on it. Not fresh. Recently wiped. The kind of thing a woman does when she's trying to make herself look composed. Then a voice came from the living room. "Ellie." Barking, aggressive even in a single word. "Who's in the kitchen?" Still drunk enough to sound mean. I stepped around the corner slowly. Dennis Hellbrook was in his recliner with a glass of bourbon balanced on his gut and a baseball game muted on the television behind him. He looked like the precise human template for a certain kind of man, hair combed too carefully for the hour, an expensive watch worn to compensate for something he'd never name, a polo shirt stretched tight across a stomach that retirement had grown soft. His eyes narrowed when he saw me, but the smile arrived almost immediately. Practiced, automatic. "Well," he said, "look who decided to visit." I ignored him and found my mother. Elaine stood near the hallway with one hand gripping her cardigan closed at the collar. Even from across the room, even in the bad light, I could see it, the split along her lower lip, fresh and dark, half hidden beneath faded pink lipstick she'd pressed on in a hurry. Something inside me went completely cold. Not hot, cold. That's the part that surprises people when they hear me describe it. They expect rage, and rage came later, but in that first second, everything inside me went very still and very clear. Like a lake before a storm, glassy and silent, with something enormous moving beneath the surface. "Mom," I said quietly, "you okay?" Dennis answered before she could open her mouth. She dropped a mug and cut herself cleaning it up. My mother tried to smile. That almost hurt worse than the cut itself. "I'm all right, honey." She wasn't. I could read her the way only a child can read a parent, the way decades of watching someone's face teaches you their tells better than any training ever could. The tight shoulders. The careful way she avoided my eyes because she was afraid of what she'd see reflected back in them. I'd watched that same posture when I was 8 years old and bill collectors used to call the house after my father died, and she'd stand very straight in the kitchen, voice steady, hands gripping the counter. "You can't just walk into people's homes in the middle of the night," Dennis announced. I looked at him directly for the first time. My mother sent me an emergency code. Something moved across his face, fast, gone before it finished arriving. Then he laughed. "Jesus Christ, you make everything dramatic." I kept my voice even. "Mom, do you want me here?" Dennis immediately talked over her. "She's tired, you should go home." But my mother nodded. One small movement, barely perceptible, still enough. Dennis stood up too fast, bourbon sloshing from the glass onto the carpet. The kind of move a man makes when he's been drinking just enough to feel powerful and not quite enough to understand that he isn't. "For God's sake, Elaine, tell her to stop acting like she's in one of those military movies." And there it was, the military comment. Dennis loved those. He'd been making them for 12 years, ever since my mother had made the mistake of mentioning that I'd served. According to him, women in the military either filed paperwork in air-conditioned offices or stood in recruitment posters looking patriotic. My actual career, the kind that doesn't appear on civilian resumes, the kind where the job title is deliberately generic and the assignments are reviewed at clearance levels most people don't know exist. That was not something Dennis Hellbrook had any framework for. I never corrected him. After a certain point in your life, you stop trying to explain yourself to people who are determined to underestimate you. Most folks back home believed I'd spent my career at a desk job somewhere near Fort Liberty. That was fine. It was certainly easier than discussing classified assignments over church potluck casseroles. Dennis moved toward me. His hand grabbed my wrist. My body responded before my conscious mind finished forming a decision. I turned slightly, rotated his forearm inward, and had him pressed against the refrigerator in under 2 seconds. Not hard enough to injure anything, just enough to stop all forward movement completely. The bourbon glass shattered somewhere behind us. Dennis made a sound, surprised and winded, the sound of a man who has never in his life had a physical confrontation that didn't go exactly the way he planned it. "Don't touch me again," I said quietly. I released him immediately and stepped back. My mother was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. Dennis rubbed his shoulder, stunned less by any pain than by the fact that it had happened at all. The humiliation had a physical texture in the room. "You crazy," he started. "Mom," I said, turning away from him, "get your overnight bag." Dennis laughed once, a short, disbelieving sound. "She's not going anywhere." But my mother had already turned toward the hallway, silently, without looking at him. And that, more than anything I had done or said, was the thing that scared him. We didn't leave that night. That's always the first question when I tell this story. Why didn't you just take her and go? I wanted to. I had her overnight bag in my hand and Dennis standing there red-faced and shaking, and every trained instinct in my body saying, "Get her out of this house right now." But my mother stopped in the back doorway. Her slippers were already wet from the rain blowing across the porch. One hand held the door frame like she needed it to stay standing. "Rachel," she whispered, "I can't just leave." Dennis heard that and smiled. Not much, just enough. That small smile told me he had been counting on that particular sentence for a very long time. I softened my voice. "Mom, you can." She shook her head. "The house, the bills, my medication, the insurance. He'll tell people I'm confused." Dennis folded his arms. "Because you are Elaine." I turned toward him. "Stop talking." He opened his mouth anyway, then seemed to remember the refrigerator and closed it again. My mother looked so small in that doorway. That was the thing that settled in my chest like a stone. She had always been sturdy, practical, the kind of woman who could carry groceries in one hand and a church casserole in the other, and still have the presence of mind to ask how your week was. But standing there in wet slippers with her cardigan pulled tight around her, she looked like someone had been slowly folding her inward for years. So I made the decision I hated. "We'll stay, Ton. But I'm staying with you." Dennis laughed once. "You're not sleeping in my house." "My mother's name is on the deed," I said, "and I'm not asking." He stared at me for a long moment, calculating, testing, weighing whether he could push again. He chose not to. That was the smartest thing he did all night. I sat my mother at the kitchen table and cleaned the cut on her lip while Dennis hovered in the next room, muttering under his breath, pretending to look for the remote control. I found the first aid kit under the sink beside the dishwasher pods and a bottle of blue cleaning spray. She flinched when the cotton touched her mouth. "Sorry," I said. "It's all right, honey." It wasn't. She kept apologizing for the broken mug, for the mess, for the trouble. That was how I knew how bad it had gotten. A woman who had just been hurt shouldn't be worried about ceramic pieces on a tile floor. I asked only one question that night. "Do you feel safe sleeping here if I'm in the house?" Her eyes moved toward the living room, then back to me. "Yes," she said. I slept in the guest room with my boots on and the lamp off, sitting on top of the quilt, listening to the house breathe. Every house has sounds at night. That one used to have peaceful sounds, the ice maker clicking, her old hallway clock ticking too loud, the neighbor's dog barking at nothing in particular. That night I heard Dennis pacing. I tracked him by the floorboards. At 1:18 in the morning, he stopped outside the guest room door. I lay completely still. He stood there for 10, maybe 12 seconds. Then he walked away. That told me everything I needed to know about what I was actually dealing with. Morning arrived gray and damp. Dennis came into the kitchen performing normalcy, khaki shorts, a Duke sweatshirt, hair wet from the shower, breath smelling of mint mouthwash, and something that didn't quite mask the bourbon from the night before. He moved through the kitchen like a man who had decided that Sunday morning clothing could erase Saturday night behavior. "My shoulder hurts," he announced. I was making coffee in my mother's old percolator. "That's strange," I said. "I thought I was just a government secretary." My mother hid a smile behind her toast. "Dennis didn't find it funny. You assaulted me, you grabbed my wrist. You were trying to forcibly remove me from a house where my mother asked me to be." He leaned across the counter toward her. "Elaine, tell her she misunderstood." And right there, in that sentence, I saw the whole machinery of it. The complete system. Not just anger, not just drinking, a system. Push, deny, reframe, make her doubt what she perceived with her own senses, make everyone around her doubt it too. Make the woman who got hurt responsible for explaining it away to the people asking questions. My mother's hand tightened around her coffee cup. I stepped between them before he could get any closer. "Back up, Dennis." His face flushed red. "You don't give orders in this house." "No," I said, "I give warnings." He held my gaze for 3 seconds. Then he grabbed his truck keys from the bowl by the door and announced he was going to breakfast, and maybe when he came back both of us would be done with our little performance. The door rattled the window when it closed. My mother didn't move for a full minute. Then she started crying without making any sound at all, shoulders shaking, tears sliding down her face, perfectly silent, the way a person cries when they have spent years learning that crying out loud causes problems. That broke something in me, not the kind of breaking that falls apart, the kind where something inside you goes very quiet and very certain. I sat beside her and asked the question I needed to ask. "Mom, has this happened before?" She wiped her face with a napkin and nodded once. "How many times?" "I don't know anymore." I had to look away for a second, at the refrigerator magnets, at the church calendar on the wall, at the photograph of me in uniform that Dennis had apparently moved to behind a stack of grocery coupons. When did it start? After he retired? Maybe before. I made excuses. "What kind?" She laughed, but there was nothing happy in it. The usual kind: stress, money, the bourbon, me being difficult. I hated how practiced those words sounded, how worn smooth, like a path through grass that gets walked so often it stops growing. Then she told me about the checking account, how Dennis had started helping with bills, how he'd taken her debit card because she was too trusting, how he read her text messages, How he told neighbors she was becoming forgetful. He says if I leave, he'll prove I can't manage alone, she whispered. There it was, the real thing underneath all of it, not one bad night. A cage built slowly, one bar at a time, over years. I covered her hand with mine. I need to document this, everything. She stiffened. No police, not yet. I won't force you, but we need a record. Messa. Jess, bank statements, photographs, anything you're willing to save. She stared at the coffee in her cup for a long moment. Would you do it legally? I'll call an attorney first thing. That seemed to settle something in her. By noon, we had changed her phone password, photographed the bruising carefully and without anything humiliating about how it was done, and written down every incident she could remember, dates where she had them, holidays where she didn't. After Thanksgiving. The week before Easter. The night the water heater broke. Real life doesn't come with clean timelines. We worked with what we had. That afternoon, while Dennis was out at the golf course, my mother and I sat at the dining room table going through paperwork with the ceiling fan clicking overhead. Old utility notices, bank statements, credit card summaries, a pink envelope from a financial institution shoved underneath a stack of old recipes. Then I found something that made my stomach drop completely. Mom, I said carefully, did you refinance the lake cabin? She looked up from the papers. No. I turned the document toward her. A property transfer form, the cabin near Lake Gaston that my father had purchased back in 1987. The place where I'd learned to fish, where Mom still kept his old metal thermos in the same kitchen cabinet 30 years after his death. Dennis's name appeared on part of the transfer. My mother's signature sat near the bottom. Only it didn't look right. Elaine stared at it for a long moment. I never signed this. I watched her face carefully. She wasn't confused. She was frightened. There's an important difference, and I knew which one I was looking at. Mom, did Dennis ever put papers in front of you without explaining what they were? She let out a short, exhausted laugh. All the time. That afternoon, I made 3 phone calls from the back porch, with the cicadas screaming in the pine trees around me. The first was to an elder law attorney in Wilmington named Susan Delgado, a former prosecutor. Sharp voice. No patience for anything resembling a runaround. The second was to an old Army colleague named Nate Hollies, who'd spent the last several years working in financial compliance for a regional bank. The third call took the longest. Adult Protective Services. A calm woman named Patris asked practical, careful questions. Was my mother mentally competent? Yes. Had there been physical violence? Yes. Was there financial control? Absolutely. Did my mother want help? I paused for a long moment on that one. Yes, I finally answered. I think she does. That evening, Dennis grilled hamburgers like we were a perfectly normal American family, enjoying a perfectly normal North Carolina evening. He stood on the back deck in white sneakers, with a spatula in his hand and country music coming softly from a portable speaker. If someone had driven by and glanced over the fence, they would have seen a retired couple and a visiting daughter having dinner on a warm night. Meanwhile, my mother flinched every time Dennis raised his voice to call the dog. I watched him through the sliding glass door and studied him the way I had studied similar subjects in very different settings over the course of a long career. Most of intelligence work isn't action. It's observation, patience, and the discipline to sit with what you're learning without reacting until the time is right. Dennis wasn't sophisticated, but he understood intimidation. He knew exactly how far to go without leaving obvious evidence, and he'd been refining that knowledge for years. At dinner, he smiled across the table at me. You still planning to stay a while? For now. Can't be healthy, he said pleasantly. A woman your age, living with her mother again. My mother immediately looked down at her plate, bracing for conflict. I took a bite of hamburger, chewed it, swallowed it, then smiled slightly. You'd be amazed what women can survive, Dennis. His jaw tightened just enough. Later that night, after he'd fallen asleep in front of the television, my mother pressed an old manila envelope into my hands. She'd found it in the back of the hall closet and forgotten about it. Inside, unpaid tax notices, gambling withdrawal receipts from a casino 2 hours away, and 2 handwritten loan documents, one for $18,000, one for $12,000. How long has he been gambling? I asked. A few years. You said he liked poker. I didn't know it was like this. She looked ashamed. I wanted to reach through time and protect her from that shame because she had nothing to be ashamed of. Good people try to love others back to stability. Sometimes it works. Sometimes the person they're trying to save is not confused or broken, they're predatory. And the two things look deceptively similar from the inside of a marriage. Around midnight, I sat alone at the kitchen table looking at the forged transfer paperwork. The younger version of me, the one who ran Operations O. Verses on adrenaline and certainty, wanted to confront Dennis immediately, push him hard, crack him open. But Susan Delgado's voice played in my head. If he feels cornered too early, he'll destroy records and turn your mother into the unstable one. So I waited, and I hated every second of it. Then my phone buzzed, Nate Holly's. Call me now, found something bad. I stepped outside onto the back porch in the dark and called him immediately. Nate didn't waste time. Rachel, your stepfather's name came up connected to elder fraud complaints in Wake County. I felt my pulse slow, that specific coldness settling in again. What kind of complaints? Loan schemes, property manipulation, mostly widows. I stood there for a moment looking through the kitchen window at Dennis, snoring in his recliner. He had moved through my mother's house as though he owned every inch of it, every corner, every drawer. He thought this was a family dispute, a domestic situation that would resolve the way these things always resolved, with the woman getting tired, getting quiet, deciding that disruption was more frightening than endurance. He had no idea what kind of situation he was actually in. A week later, Dennis invited the extended family to Sunday dinner at my cousin Laura's house in Cary. A big brick place in a development where every mailbox matched and every backyard had a gas grill. He carried a peach cobbler in through the front door like a man running for office, announcing the family gathering like he'd organized it for everybody's benefit. I almost didn't go. I was exhausted in the specific way that sustained low-grade alertness creates, not physical tiredness, but the mental cost of watching someone dangerous smile at everyone around you while you hold what you know very quietly inside. But my mother wanted to go. I don't want people asking questions. That sentence sat badly with me. She'd spent years organizing her life around protecting him from questions instead of protecting herself from harm. I understood it. I also knew we needed to change it. Dennis worked the room the way certain men work rooms, a hand on a shoulder here, a loud laugh there, pulling out chairs for my mother in front of witnesses, kissing her cheek while the family watched. Every gesture a performance, every performance a vote he was casting for his own character. My cousin Laura leaned toward me near the kitchen island. You and Dennis doing better. We're managing. Dinner moved outside. Kids running with leftover sparklers. Bluetooth music playing too softly. Citronella candles and the smell of grilled chicken in the humid air. All the ordinary textures of a family summer evening, which somehow made the dishonesty of it worse. Dennis held court at the head of the patio table. He launched into stories, golf, gas prices, the usual grievances of a retired man with an audience. Then he started steering, subtle at first, toward me. Rachel's had a hard time adjusting since she left the military. Change hits a person differently when they've spent years in high-pressure environments. Laura glanced at me with visible discomfort. Dennis kept going. Some folks come home carrying things. There it was, planting seeds before anything became public. Establishing a narrative, she's unstable. She's seeing conspiracies. She's dramatic. She can't be fully trusted. My uncle cleared his throat. She seems all right to me. Oh sure, Dennis said warmly. Rachel's tough, sometimes maybe too tough. My mother went completely still beside me. I looked up. Dennis, you should probably stop talking now. His smile tightened. See what I mean? That intensity. People shifted in their chairs. Nobody wants the sharp moment at the family cookout. Dennis leaned back like a man perfectly at ease. I'm just saying combat changes people. I set down my fork carefully. I was Army intelligence, not combat arms. Same difference. Not remotely the same difference. But that was his point, not accuracy. Power. He wanted everyone at that table quietly wondering if maybe I was overreacting, maybe too emotional, maybe damaged in ways that should be accounted for. I'd read briefings on manipulation tactics more sophisticated than this. What struck me wasn't the technique. It was how confident he was that it would work. After dinner, I walked into the garage to find more bottled water. Dennis followed me in. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, the smell of motor oil and cut grass. "You enjoying yourself?" he asked. "I'm fine." "People talk when middle-aged women move back in with their mothers," he said softly. "I appreciate the concern." His tone shifted. "I built that life with Elaine. You think you can walk in after all these years and dismantle it?" I picked up the water case. "You dismantled it yourself." His face hardened. "There's not a single person in this family who's going to take your word over mine." I didn't answer. That bothered him more than an argument. "NT would have. She needs me. You think your mother survives on her own? Lawyers, courtrooms, bills. She'll fall apart in a month." That one almost found a nerve. Not because I believed it, because I knew it was the exact thing he'd spent years telling her, and I knew some part of her still believed it. "You should stop talking when you think you're winning," I said quietly. Something flickered in his eyes, real uncertainty. Footsteps from inside. Laura pushed the garage door open, looking between us with the careful brightness of someone who senses tension and desperately hopes to diffuse it. Dennis grabbed a water bottle immediately, just helping out. Later that evening, near the fence at the edge of Laura's yard, an older man named Carl Whittaker pulled me aside. One of Dennis's regular poker friends. Quiet man with tired eyes who'd been watching Dennis work the room all evening with an expression I couldn't fully read. "You got a minute?" I nodded. "Dennis has been talking to your mother about investments," he said, low and careful. Every nerve sharpened. "My sister got involved with him last year. He told her about a property improvement venture. Passive income, he said, safe as houses." Carl swallowed. "She lost $40,000. The pieces kept arriving, and they kept fitting." "Did she file a report?" "Didn't want to admit she'd been fooled." "Would she talk now?" Carl looked across the yard at Dennis, who was loudly explaining cryptocurrency to my uncle while repeatedly calling it by the wrong name. Then Carl looked back at me. "If it stops him from doing it to somebody else, yes, I think she would." I nodded slowly. "Thank you, Carl." He rubbed the back of his neck. I always thought something wasn't right with him. I watched Dennis across the patio, laughing too loudly under the string lights. "Yeah," I said quietly, "so did I." Dennis hosted poker night every other Friday, same crew, same routine. Garage refrigerator stocked with beer. Folding card table in the den. Cigars on the back deck. It had been a fixture of the household for years, and my mother had learned to treat those Fridays the way you treat incoming weather. You prepare, you stay quiet, you wait for it to pass. The Friday everything changed. I helped my mother load 2 overnight bags into my truck at 4 in the afternoon while Dennis was out getting ice. She kept watching the end of the driveway. "You all right?" I asked. She nodded too quickly. "Really?" She took a shaky breath. "I keep feeling guilty." "For leaving?" "Yes." "That's normal. I should have done this years ago." I leaned against the tailgate. "You sent the code, Mom. That matters." Her eyes filled immediately, not dramatic, just quiet and exhausted, the way tears come when something that's been held for a very long time finally has permission to move. "I was so embarrassed," she whispered. "You don't need to be." A breeze moved through the pines at the back of the yard. A lawn mower droned somewhere down the block. Ordinary sounds. Life continuing its ordinary business while something important was finally being decided. I closed the truck gently. "Tonight isn't about revenge," I told her. She looked at me for a moment. "Yes, it is," she said softly. I thought about arguing, decided against it, because she wasn't entirely wrong and because part of me wanted exactly that, not movie revenge, not violence, but exposure. I wanted Dennis sitting in a room where his performance didn't work, where the charm ran out, where the carefully constructed image finally gave way to what was underneath it. We drove her to her friend Sharon's condo near Garner at 6:30. She carried 2 bags and her medications. 40 years of adult life reduced to overnight luggage. That weight settled in me as I drove back to the house. Poker night had already started when I arrived. I parked half a block away and sat in the dark for a moment, watching warm yellow light spill through the living room curtains. Laughter drifted out through the windows, Dennis's voice carrying louder than anyone else's. I went inside. Carl Whitaker was at the card table nursing a beer. 2 former colleagues of Dennis's were arguing college basketball. Someone had already tracked ash onto my mother's carpet. Dennis stood near the kitchen island pouring bourbon like a man hosting his own private country. He looked up when he saw me and smiled the big smile. Looks like the princess soldier came to supervise. A couple of men chuckled politely. Carl didn't. I closed the door behind me. Mom's staying at Sharon's tonight. Dennis blinked once, recovered fast. Good for her. But I saw it, the flash of panic that crossed his face and vanished. The tell. One of the men at the table frowned. Everything okay with Elaine? She gets emotional sometimes, Dennis said, waving a hand. I pulled out a chair and sat down across from him. No, she gets afraid sometimes. The room shifted. Dennis forced a laugh. Are we doing this now, at my poker night? He looked around the table for backup, found less than he was expecting. You know what Rachel's problem is, he announced to the room. Too many years in government work. She thinks everyone's guilty of something. Nobody answered. Dennis poured himself another drink, a man getting progressively less careful. She actually thinks I control Elaine. A snort. Hell, Elaine signs whatever I put in front of her. You spend enough years married to someone, you learn how to manage people. Carl looked up slowly. One of the dealership men shifted in his chair. Dennis kept talking, drunk enough to have lost track of his own performance. I'm joking. No, he wasn't. I leaned back. What about the cabin, Dennis? His eyes snapped to me. What cabin? Lake Gaston, my father's property. You mean Elaine's property? My father's property, I said again. The transfer form with your name on it. The one with the signature that doesn't match any document my mother has ever signed. Silence, real silence. Even the television in the other room sounded suddenly too loud. Dennis shrugged. Property taxes are expensive. Carl set down his beer can very carefully. You told me your wife inherited that place. Dennis looked irritated. She did. No, I said, she didn't. Are you accusing me of something? Before I could answer, headlights swept across the front windows. Then another set. Then another. Dennis looked toward the driveway, then at me, then back at the driveway. What the hell did you do? Firm knocking at the front door, professional, unhurried. One of the poker players muttered something under his breath. Dennis moved toward the door. I stepped sideways into his path, not aggressive, just present. There. His face went red. You set me up. No, Dennis, I said quietly. You set yourself up. The knock came again. Mr. Hellbrook, Wake County Sheriff's Office, we need to speak with you. He looked around the room desperately, at Carl, at his friends, at me, searching for the control he'd misplaced and couldn't find. Carl stood from the poker table. My sister filed her statement yesterday, he said simply. Dennis stared at him in pure disbelief. You stole from a widow, Dennis. One of the dealership men pushed his chair back from the table. Dennis, what is going on? She's lying, he pointed at me wildly. All of this is her. She's been turning Elaine against me since the day she showed up. I walked to the front door and opened it. 2 deputies stood on the porch beside a woman from Adult Protective Services, holding a folder thick with paperwork. Light rain had started again behind them. The deputy on the left looked past me into the room, then looked back at me. Something shifted on his face, a kind of recalibration. Ma'am, he said carefully, Lieutenant Colonel Mercer. Yes. He straightened slightly. I didn't realize you were involved in this. Behind me, I heard Dennis go completely silent. The deputy turned back toward him. Mr. Hellbrook, we have some questions regarding financial exploitation, complaints, and statements filed by Mrs. Hellbrook. Dennis laughed. It came out wrong. This is insane. This is absolutely. Nobody laughed with him. Carl looked away. One of the dealership men quietly pocketed his keys. The other stared at the tabletop. The little kingdom was coming apart in real time, and Dennis was the only person in the room who hadn't understood until this moment that it was ever going to end. He looked at me again. "Rachel, come on, we're family." I held his gaze for a moment. "No, Dennis, we were just trapped in the same house." Outside, across the yard near my truck, my mother stood under an umbrella beside Sharon. I hadn't told her to come. She had come anyway. Dennis saw her and stepped toward the porch. The deputy stopped him gently. My mother looked at him across the wet grass. Then she reached up and removed her wedding ring, not dramatically, not in anger, just calmly, deliberately. The way a person removes something they've been wearing so long they forgot it was there. "I'm done being afraid in my own kitchen," she said. Dennis opened his mouth. Nothing came out. And honestly, that silence was the most satisfying thing I had witnessed in the entire preceding month. People think the hard part is over once someone leaves. It isn't. The hard part is everything that comes next, in the ordinary daylight, with no emergency and no adrenaline. The legal proceedings, the hearings, the paperwork reviewed by lawyers billing by the 15-minute increment, the statements and the counterstatements, and the long weeks of waiting for institutions to move at the speed that institutions move. Dennis was eventually charged with financial exploitation, fraud related to the forged property transfer, and intimidation tied to multiple witness statements. Carl's sister testified. So did two other women who had never met each other before the invest. Agation connected them. My mother, it turned out, had not been his first. She had been his most recent and most thorough practice. That knowledge made me physically sick for a period of time. Not because it surprised me. Predators rarely begin with their worst. They work toward it. They refine. My mother's name was on that list because she had been the most convenient, the most trusting, the most willing to interpret his behavior as something other than what it was. That wasn't a character flaw in her. It was exactly what he had selected her for. The lake cabin stayed in our family. When Susan Delgado called with the news that the forged transfer had been blocked, my mother sat in her chair at the little townhouse. She'd moved into near Wilmington and cried the quiet kind of tears that have nothing to do with drama and everything to do with relief arriving after too long. My father had bought that cabin after 20 years on the floor of a textile plant. Every warped floorboard and crooked cabinet door in that place had his fingerprints somewhere on its history. Losing it would have taken something from her that couldn't have been replaced with money or legal victories. She moved into a small townhouse on the edge of Wilmington 4 months after poker night. Beige siding, a narrow front porch, wind chimes that rattled pleasantly whenever the coastal air moved through. Nothing extravagant. Quiet, though, that mattered more than anything else. The first time I visited after the move, I noticed she was sleeping through the night. No television running at 2 a.m., no footsteps. No sound of truck doors slamming outside her window. Just sleep. Full, uninterrupted sleep, the kind that the body forgets how to achieve when it's been on low-level alert for years. I don't think most people understand what sustained fear does to a person physically until they watch someone slowly coming out of it. It's like watching color return to a room. She joined a watercolor class. Twice a week at the senior center, Wednesday and Friday mornings, and she started coming home with small paintings that she propped against the windowsill to dry: coastal herons, marsh grass, abstract shapes that she said were just practice, but that I thought were quite good. She started buying flowers for the porch. She began drinking her morning coffee slowly, without the anxious rush of a woman who expected criticism with every sip. One afternoon, I found her outside with her feet on a stool and an old paperback mystery open in her lap. And I stood in the doorway for a moment watching her simply be somewhere without monitoring anything. And the ordinariness of it hit me so hard I had to look away. One Saturday in October, we drove up to the lake cabin together for the first time since everything had happened. North Carolina autumn had settled fully in by then. The trees along the highway had gone gold and copper, and that particular rust red that only lasts about 2 weeks before the leaves drop. The air through the cracked windows smelled like damp leaves and wood smoke. The cabin looked smaller than I remembered. That happens with childhood places. My mother unlocked the door slowly and pushed it open, and the smell came out first, coffee grounds and old pine, and the faint ghost of the tackle oil from the box my father used to keep under the kitchen sink. Neither of us said anything for a moment. The silence in the cabin was thick with all the years of it. Then my mother laughed softly. "What?" She pointed at the refrigerator. "Your father still has mustard in there from 2019. I laughed harder than the joke probably warranted. But sometimes laughter arrives because you need it more than because you've earned it. We spent the afternoon cleaning. Opened windows, swept leaves from the deck, found photo albums in a plastic storage bin at the back of a closet. The afternoon light came low and golden through the lake-facing windows, and the whole place felt suspended, held between past and present in a way that felt almost intentional. At one point, my mother sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs and stared out toward the water. "You know what's strange?" she said. "What?" I thought leaving him would feel dramatic. I leaned against the counter and waited. It didn't, she shook her head slowly. It felt quiet. That made complete sense to me. Most genuinely important moments are quieter than anything we've been taught to expect. No music, no speech, no slow motion arrival at a moment of clarity. Just somebody finally getting tired enough to choose themselves, and the whole rest of the world continuing to spin, ordinary and indifferent, while that one small private decision changes everything. Later, we sat on the dock wrapped in old blankets while the sun went down over the water. The surface of the lake caught the last light and held it. A heron stood in the shallows at the opposite shore, absolutely still. "I need to tell you something, my M." Others said. I glanced over. "When you were little, after your father died, I always worried you grew up too fast, too serious, too watchful." "I was kind of a strange kid," I said. "You were careful," she corrected, "always reading the room, always trying to anticipate." I looked out at the water. She wasn't wrong. Military training had sharpened instincts I'd already had since childhood. It hadn't created them. "I thought keeping things peaceful in the house was the same as protecting you," she said. "I convinced myself that keeping things stable, keeping everyone calm, was the responsible thing." "Mom." No, her voice was quiet but firm. "Let me say it. I should have left sooner. I should have stopped explaining his behavior away. I should have understood what it was doing to both of us instead of trying to hold everything together with my bare hands." She looked older than I'd ever seen her look in that moment. Not weak, just honest. Completely, exhaustedly honest in the way a person can only be when they've stopped performing anything. I moved closer and put my arm around her shoulders. "Mom," I said, "the bravest thing you did wasn't leaving." She looked at me. It was sending the code. She came apart then, quietly, the way she always cried, her whole body shaking without much sound, and I held on while the lake knocked softly against the dock beneath us, and the light finished leaving the sky, and the heron across the water eventually lifted off and disappeared into the dark line of the trees. A few weeks later, driving back to Fayetteville with the windows cracked and old classic rock playing too quietly through the truck speakers, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not victory, not triumph, not the clean narrative satisfaction of a story where the right person wins and the wrong one suffers appropriately. Just peace, the plain, unglamorous, deeply underrated fact of peace. Dennis believed that quiet meant compliant. That patience meant submission. That a woman who kept her voice level and her face calm was a woman who could be underestimated safely, indefinitely, without consequence. By the time he finally understood the difference between someone who was restrained and someone who was weak, my mother was already in a small townhouse near the coast painting herons in a watercolor class on Wednesday mornings. And Dennis was sitting in a room where his charm had stopped working, finding out that the walls had been closing in on him for much longer than he'd realized. I've thought a lot about what the lesson is in all of it. I don't think there's one clean lesson. Life rarely offers those. But I know this. If you're watching someone you love stay quiet longer than makes sense, if you're watching them make themselves smaller, explain away things that shouldn't need explaining, apologize for injuries that happened to them, trust what you're seeing. You're probably not wrong. And sometimes people don't need to be rescued. They just need someone willing to stand beside them, steadily, without flinching, until they're finally ready to walk out the door on their own. My mother walked out on her own. She just needed to know she didn't have to do it alone.